A cold breeze whispered through the streets of Los Angeles as a 12-year-old boy named Tommy walked along the sidewalks, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his tattered jacket. The towering buildings around him shimmered with neon lights, advertising luxury brands, high-end restaurants, and the latest blockbuster films. But to Tommy, they were just another reminder of a world that didn't include him. He pushed a rusted shopping cart filled with aluminum cans and plastic bottles, carefully collected throughout the evening. Each piece of discarded trash held the promise of a few cents, maybe even enough for a hot meal before the shelter closed its kitchen for the night. He had become an expert at navigating these streets, knowing exactly which dumpsters to check, which alleys held the best recyclables, and which security guards would turn a blind eye to his scavenging. Tonight, however, something different caught his eye. Under the glow of a flickering street lamp, something sparkled a glimmer so distinct that it stopped him in his tracks. He stepped closer, his heartbeat quickening. Lying on the pavement, half hidden beneath a discarded napkin, was a bracelet unlike anything he had ever seen. Delicate, yet heavy. Its golden chain shimmered, encrusted with diamonds that refracted the city lights like tiny captured stars. Tommy bent down, his fingers hesitating before picking it up. It felt cool in his hands, heavier than it looked, and instinctively, he knew this wasn't fake. This was real, expensive, the kind of thing that could change everything. 100 thoughts flooded his mind at once. This bracelet could mean food, not just for tonight, but for weeks. It could mean a better coat for the winter, new shoes to replace the ones with holes in the soles, maybe even a place for him and his mother to live something more than the crowded shelter they had called home for the past year. But even as these thoughts swirled inside him, another feeling crept in, something quieter but harder to ignore. A voice in the back of his mind, a lesson his mother had drilled into him since he was old enough to understand right from wrong. If something isn't yours, Tommy, then it doesn't belong to you. His fingers tightened around the bracelet. What should he do? From across the street, seated in the corner of a quiet cafe, Keanu Reeves watched everything unfold. He had been there for an evening coffee, an unplanned detour from his usual routine. Fate, it seemed, had placed him in this moment. He had seen the bracelet fall watched as Sandra Bullock, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses, unknowingly lost it as she left the charity gala. And now, he watched as a young boy, a child who clearly had so little held in his hands, something worth more money than he had likely ever seen. Keanu leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, intrigued. He had no intention of intervening, at least not yet. He wanted to see what the boy would do. Tommy swallowed hard, glancing up and down the street. No one else had noticed the bracelet. No one was looking for it. He could sell it. No one would ever know. Or he could do something else. Taking a deep breath, he slipped the bracelet into the pocket of his worn-out jacket, his decision still uncertain. With one last glance at the cafe across the street, unaware that Keanu Reeves was watching, Tommy gripped the handle of his shopping cart and pushed forward, disappearing into the night. Keanu smiled to himself, took a sip of his coffee, and pulled out his phone. Something told him this was just the beginning. The dim glow of the library's computer screen cast a soft blue light on Tommy's face as he sat hunched over the keyboard, his fingers hesitating over the keys. The public library had become his safe haven, a place where no one looked at him with pity or suspicion, where he could sit for hours without being asked to leave. Tonight, however, he wasn't here to escape the streets or warm himself in the cozy silence between the bookshelves. Tonight, he had one goal. He took a deep breath and typed into the search bar, "Diamond bracelet value." Within seconds, images flooded the screen, glittering jewelry displayed in velvet cases, price tags that made his stomach twist. $10,000, $20,000, some even more. Tommy swallowed hard, his hand slipping into his pocket where the bracelet lay wrapped in a crumpled napkin. This wasn't just valuable, it was life-changing. His mother's face flashed in his mind. Her tired smile, the way she counted every dollar, stretching their meager income as far as it could go. The nights she skipped meals so he could eat. With money like this, he could change everything. But then, his eyes caught something detail he hadn't noticed before. He pulled the bracelet from his pocket and turned it over in the dim light. There, engraved on the clasp in elegant cursive, were 4 words: "To Sandra, with love." His stomach dropped. Sandra. Could it be? A new search. This time, he typed, "Sandra Bullock bracelet." News articles popped up, photos from red carpet events, magazine covers. And there was the same bracelet, glistening on her wrist at award shows, charity galas. One headline made his heart stop. Sandra Bullock. This bracelet was my mother's last gift to me. I never take it off. Tommy's hands trembled as he traced the engraving again. This wasn't just jewelry. This was a memory, a piece of someone's past, a connection to a mother who was gone. He thought of the only photo he had of his own mother before their world fell apart. The one thing he clung to when things got bad. Some things were worth more than money. Just one more hour, Tommy. Miss Chen, the librarian, called softly from her desk. Tommy nodded, closing the tabs. His mind was made up. Outside, parked under the glow of a street lamp, Keanu Reeves watched through the library's large front window. He had followed the boy not in a way that felt intrusive, but with quiet curiosity. He had seen the moment Tommy hesitated, seen the decision forming in his eyes. Keanu leaned back on his motorcycle seat and smiled. Some people might have taken the easy way, but not this kid, not Tommy. And Keanu had a feeling the universe wasn't done with him yet. The towering glass windows of the Fortis Films building reflected the late afternoon sun, casting long golden beams across the bustling streets of Los Angeles. Tommy stood on the opposite sidewalk, gripping the straps of his backpack so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Inside that backpack, wrapped in the soft fabric of an old t-shirt, was Sandra Bullock's bracelet. His heartbeat pounded in his ears as he stared at the building's entrance. Sleek, modern, intimidating. The kind of place where a kid like him didn't belong. But he had made his choice. Taking a deep breath, he crossed the street and stepped inside. The lobby was all polished marble floors and expensive-looking furniture. A security guard behind a desk glanced up immediately, his eyes narrowing as he took in Tommy's tattered jacket, his scuffed sneakers. Tommy cleared his throat, trying to sound confident. I need to speak to someone about Sandra Bullock's bracelet." For a long moment, the guard just stared at him. Then, without a word, he picked up the phone. Minutes passed, stretching endlessly. Tommy's fingers curled into his sleeves, nerves prickling up his spine. What if they didn't believe him? What if they thought he had stolen it? Then the elevator doors slid open. A woman in a sharp business suit stepped out first, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Tommy recognized her immediately from the photos he had found online. Emily Carter, Sandra Bullock's personal assistant. But it was the man walking beside her that made Tommy's breath catch. Keanu Reeves. Tommy blinked, his mind struggling to process why one of the most famous actors in the world was standing in front of him. "Hello, Tommy," Keanu said, his voice warm, as if they had met before. Tommy's mouth opened, then closed. "How do you know my name?" Keanu smiled slightly. "I've been keeping an eye on this little adventure of yours." Tommy's confusion must have shown on his face, because Keanu chuckled. "I was there when Sandra lost it," he explained. "I saw you find the bracelet that night." Tommy's stomach twisted. You saw me?" Keanu nodded. "And I saw the choices you made. I saw you go to the library. I saw you look up the bracelet instead of selling it. That told me everything I needed to know about you." Tommy's throat tightened. He had spent his whole life being invisible, just another homeless kid on the streets of LA, but Keanu had noticed him. Emily, meanwhile, had her eyes locked on Tommy's backpack. "You have it?" she asked, her voice almost desperate. Tommy hesitated for only a second before nodding. Slowly, he unzipped his backpack and pulled out the bracelet. The diamonds caught the light, scattering tiny rainbows across the polished floor. Emily let out a breath of pure relief. "Oh my God, we've been searching everywhere for this." She reached for it, but Keanu gently stopped her with a hand on her wrist. "I think Sandra would want to thank him in person," he said. Emily hesitated, then nodded. "She's filming across town, but I can have a car bring her here in an hour." Keanu shook his head. "Not here. Somewhere quieter." Then he turned back to Tommy. "There's a little diner about 2 blocks from here. Mary's Place. Do you know it?" Tommy's eyes widened slightly. He knew that place well. He had spent many nights standing outside its big front window, watching families eat warm meals, wishing he was one of them. "Meet us there in an hour," Keanu said. "I think this story deserves a proper ending." As Tommy left the building, the weight of the bracelet was gone from his backpack, but something else had settled in his chest. A strange, new feeling. Hope. The neon sign above Mary's Place Diner flickered softly against the twilight sky, casting a warm glow over the sidewalk. Inside, the scent of fresh coffee and grilled cheese filled the air. wrapping around Tommy like a familiar embrace as he stepped through the door. He had never been inside before. He had stood outside plenty of times, watching through the big front window as families laughed over plates of pancakes and old friends caught up over coffee. But he had never crossed the threshold. Until now. Keanu Reeves was already seated in a corner booth, 2 untouched cups of hot chocolate on the table in front of him. As Tommy hesitated, the waitress Linda gave him a small smile. "You can go in, honey," she said gently. "He's been asking about you." Tommy swallowed, then made his way toward the booth, sliding into the seat across from Keanu. The vinyl squeaked under his weight. "Hot chocolate," Keanu said, pushing one of the mugs toward him. "I heard from Linda that it's your favorite." Tommy stared at the steaming cup, his fingers curling around the warm ceramic. It had been a long time since someone had gotten him something just because. Before he could think of what to say, the bell above the door chimed again. Tommy turned, and his breath caught. Sandra Bullock. She wasn't dressed in red carpet glamour or expensive designer clothes. Just jeans, a sweater, and tired eyes that looked slightly red, as if she had been crying. She spotted Tommy immediately. Then her gaze dropped to his backpack. "Is that?" she started, her voice quiet. Tommy nodded and slowly unzipped his bag, carefully pulling out the bracelet. The diner's fluorescent lights caught the diamonds, making them shimmer against the worn tabletop. Sandra pressed a hand to her mouth as she reached for it. "I found it on the street," Tommy said, his voice small. I knew it had to mean something to someone." Sandra sat down beside Keanu, holding the bracelet in her hands like it was something fragile, something precious. "This was the last thing my mother gave me before she passed," she whispered. "When I lost it, I felt like I lost her all over again." Tommy swallowed hard, his hands twisting in his lap. Keanu glanced at him. "Tell her what else you found, Tommy." Tommy hesitated, then took a deep breath. "There was an engraving," he said. It said, "To Sandra with love, Mom. When I saw that, I knew I couldn't keep it. I know what it's like to have something that connects you to someone." Sandra looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Tommy glanced down at his hands. "My mom and I, we live at the shelter now. But I have this photo of her from before. It's the only thing we have left from our old life. Some things are worth more than money." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Sandra and Keanu exchanged a look that seemed to carry a whole conversation without words. Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, placing it on the table in front of Tommy. His heart sank. "No," he said immediately, shaking his head. "I didn't do it for a reward." "We know," Keanu said gently. "That's exactly why you deserve one." "But it's not what you think," Sandra added. "This isn't money, Tommy. It's something better." Tommy hesitated, then slowly reached for the envelope and opened it. Inside weren't bills. They were documents, housing assistance papers, school enrollment forms, and something that made his breath hitch. A job placement letter for his mother. At Sandra's production company. Tommy's hands shook. "Sometimes," Keanu said softly, watching his reaction, "doing the right thing leads us exactly where we need to be." Sandra reached across the table and took Tommy's hand. "Your mother raised a remarkable young man," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Now, let us help you both build the life you deserve." Outside, the city carried on, cars honking, lights flashing, people moving through their lives without knowing that something extraordinary had just happened inside a small diner. Inside, around a table with half-empty cups of hot chocolate, 3 lives had become forever intertwined. And for the first time in a long time, Tommy let himself believe in something he had almost forgotten: a future. The soft morning light streamed through the windows of a small but cozy apartment in Los Angeles. It wasn't much, a modest 2-bedroom with second-hand furniture, but to Tommy and his mother, it was everything. A home. Tommy stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the tie of his school uniform. He had never worn one before. A year ago, the idea of attending a private school felt like something out of a dream. Now, thanks to Sandra's scholarship, he was not only enrolled, he was excelling. His reflection showed a different boy than the one who had once wandered the streets collecting cans. His cheeks were fuller, his eyes brighter. In the kitchen, his mother hummed softly as she packed his lunch. The sound of her happiness still felt like a gift tone he got to unwrap every morning. Her production assistant badge for Fortis Films lay next to her coffee cup on the counter, a daily reminder of how much their lives had changed. "You're going to be late for your meeting," she called. The meeting was actually his monthly breakfast with Keanu at Mary's place. It had become their tradition every first Saturday of the month. They would meet to talk about life, school, books, and whatever else came to mind. Tommy grabbed his bag and rushed out the door, his heart lighter than it had ever been. Mary's Place Diner. Linda, the waitress who had once slipped Tommy leftovers, now greeted him like family. "Your usual, sweetheart?" she asked with a grin. Tommy slid into the familiar booth. "Yes, please." A plate of French toast with extra syrup arrived a few minutes later, just as Keanu walked in. He wore his usual leather jacket, his motorcycle helmet tucked under his arm. "How's the robotics club going?" Keanu asked, stirring his coffee. Tommy's face lit up. "We're entering the state competition next month. Sandra's coming to watch." Keanu chuckled. "Of course she is." As if on cue, the bell above the door jingled again, and Sandra Bullock walked in. "This isn't planned, is it?" Tommy asked, raising an eyebrow. Sandra smirked. "Maybe. Maybe not." She slid into the booth, pulling out a folded newspaper. "I wanted to show you something," she said, placing it on the table. Tommy's eyes widened. Right there, on the front page of the LA Times community section, was a photo of him and his robotics team. The headline read, "From Homeless to Harvard Bound, Local Teens' Remarkable Journey." Tommy blinked. "Harvard?" Sandra smiled. "Your teachers think you have a real shot at it." Keanu nudged Tommy's arm. "More importantly, they want to write about the scholarship program you started." Tommy ducked his head, suddenly shy. "How many kids from the shelter are you tutoring now?" Sandra asked. Tommy hesitated, then said, 15. Miss Chen at the library helps us with the space after hours." Sandra touched her bracelet, a habit Tommy had noticed over the past year. "You know," she said softly, "when I lost this, I thought I had lost my last connection to my mother. Instead, I gained something even more valuable." She squeezed Tommy's hand. "A family." Keanu pulled out an envelope and slid it across the table. "For you," he said. Tommy opened it and froze. Inside was a set of keys, a deed to a small storefront. "For your mom's catering business," Keanu explained. "The one she's been dreaming about starting." Tommy's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Sometimes," Keanu added, "good things come full circle." Tommy looked around the dinner at Linda pouring coffee with a smile, at the booth where his life had changed forever, at these two Hollywood stars who had become more than just famous names. They had become family. His eyes fell on Sandra's bracelet, remembering how it all started. "You know what's funny?" Tommy said, his voice thick with emotion. Sandra and Keanu looked at him. "Everyone thinks the most valuable thing I found that night was a diamond bracelet." He shook his head, smiling. "But the most valuable things I found were the things money can't buy." Outside Mary's place, the city hummed with life, full of dreams and possibilities. Inside, around a table with empty breakfast plates and full hearts, sat proof that sometimes the greatest riches come not from what we keep, but from what we choose to give back. 5 years later, a golden banner stretched across the storefront, fluttering gently in the warm Los Angeles breeze. "Grand Opening, Maria's Kitchen and Catering." The words gleamed in gold letters against the fresh glass windows of the new restaurant. Inside, the kitchen was alive with motion staff dressed in crisp aprons, trays of freshly baked empanadas being arranged, and the scent of home-cooked meals filling the air. At the center of it all, moving with quiet grace, was Tommy's mother, Maria. She had dreamt of this moment for years, a business of her own, a future she built with her own hands. And today, it was finally real. At the entrance, Tommy stood in a neatly pressed suit, watching with pride. He was no longer the skinny boy who pushed a shopping cart full of recyclables through the streets. Now, he was a sophomore at Harvard Engineering, back home for the summer before heading off for his next big step. On his wrist, a simple but elegant watch gleamed in the sunlight, a graduation gift from both Sandra and Keanu. Engraved on the back were 3 words, "Time reveals character." Inside the restaurant, Sandra Bullock walked through the kitchen doors, her famous bracelet catching the light as she hugged Maria tightly. "You did it," Sandra whispered, tears in her eyes. Maria smiled, holding on for a moment longer. "No, Sandra, we did it." Behind her, Keanu Reeves entered, carrying a bottle of champagne. "I hope I'm not too late for the celebration." Sandra laughed. "Keanu, you're literally never late." Tommy stepped forward, shaking Keanu's hand. "Good to see you, kid." "You too," Tommy said with a grin. Keanu clapped a hand on his shoulder. "How's that internship going?" Tommy's smile widened. His summer internship at Keanu's motorcycle company had just ended, and he had already received an offer to join their design team after graduation. "It's amazing," Tommy said. "I can't believe this is my life now." Keanu smirked. "Believe it." Sandra motioned toward the second floor of the building, where large windows overlooked the city. "Did you see the sign?" she asked. Tommy followed her gaze. There, in bold letters above the second-story windows, were the words, "The Tommy Martinez Educational Center." His chest tightened. The very shelter where he and his mother had once lived had been transformed. The second floor now served as an educational center for homeless youth, a place where they could receive tutoring, job training, and hope. Funded by Sandra and Keanu's foundations, it had already helped dozens of kids find their way back to stability. Tommy blinked hard. "I don't know what to say." Sandra smiled. "Say you'll keep changing lives." Keanu raised his glass. 2 full circles. Sandra and Maria followed suit, and Tommy, his heart full, lifted his glass too. To full circles. As they toasted, the restaurant buzzed with laughter, warmth, and the promise of new beginnings. Outside, Los Angeles moved on, unaware that 5 lives had been forever changed by a single act of honesty. And inside, around a table filled with food, family, and laughter, Tommy knew the truth. The most valuable things in life weren't made of gold or diamonds. They were made of kindness, trust, and the courage to do the right thing,